Leave if you want, you will be begging to come back in 2 weeks. He said it the way someone might mention the dreary afternoon weather outside. Casual, dismissive, almost utterly bored. Gerald Thorne leaned back in his plush leather executive chair, his tailored dark suit jacket still neatly buttoned, his facial expression completely flat and void of empathy. I stood across the polished glass conference table, holding a thick manila folder packed with meticulous operational data, guest retention statistics, and the proprietary service algorithms I had spent over 4 years developing. He had not opened it. He had not even bothered to touch the cover. Then the laughter erupted throughout the room. 7 high-level corporate executives, 7 colleagues I had worked alongside for nearly half a decade, people whose milestone birthdays I had personally organized celebrations for, people whose children I had asked about every Monday morning, were all seated surrounding Gerald Thorne. Every single one of them joined in the mockery. It was not the light-hearted laughter shared over an amusing workplace anecdote. It was the sharp, sinister sound of ambitious middle managers who had been waiting for executive permission to tear someone down, and Gerald had just handed them the green light. The senior vice president of human resources, sitting closest to Gerald, actually wiped tears of amusement from her eyes. Her name was Melanie. She made a deliberate point of looking straight into my eyes as she did it, ensuring I felt the full weight of the public humiliation. The vice president of finance chuckled softly behind his manicured hands, while the head of corporate marketing shook his head with patronizing pity. My hands did not shake. My posture remained rigid and composed. At 48 years old, I had weathered corporate restructurings, economic downturns, and executive shifts long enough to know when a room had turned hostile beyond repair. I looked directly into Gerald Thorne's cold eyes and said, "All right." Then I gathered my personal leather briefcase, stood up from the mahogany chair, and walked out of the glass boardroom. My name is Harlan Vance. For over 4 years, I served as the Vice President of Guest Experience and Operational Excellence at Crestview Hospitality Group. My job title did not fully reflect the true scope of what I had built from the ground up. When I was first recruited by the original founding chairman, Crestview was a modest regional chain of 12 boutique hotel properties catering to upscale travelers who sought refined, quiet luxury over mega-resort commercialization. I had spent countless nights traveling across the country, mentoring staff, establishing service standards, and ensuring that every single property operated like a finely tuned instrument. By the time Gerald Thorne laughed at me, our portfolio had expanded to 47 luxury properties nationwide, generating record annual revenues and building an enviable market reputation. My core operational philosophy was simple yet profound. True luxury is not defined by expensive marble floors or gold-plated fixtures, but by the quiet anticipation of human needs. I had spent years institutionalizing a training program that taught staff members to observe subtle behavioral cues. How a tired executive holds his shoulders after a delayed flight, or how a grieving widow looks at a quiet garden view. We crafted customized recovery protocols and personal touchpoints that transformed routine lodging stays into deeply meaningful personal experiences. This intangible culture of empathy was the true engine driving Crestview's industry-leading customer retention rates. I knew our VIP guests intimately. I did not merely track their names on a standardized computer spreadsheet. I maintained a customized, encrypted personal database detailing the specific nuances that made them feel truly valued. There was the retired corporate attorney who always requested a firm orthopedic mattress due to extensive spinal surgery, the tech executive who required a rare brand of loose-leaf chamomile tea not normally stocked in our pantries, and the elderly couple who insisted on some corner suites facing east so they could watch the morning sunrise together. These were not generic corporate directives recorded in a shared computer drive. They were personal insights held within my specialized workflow, which I had trained my dedicated team of 40 operational specialists to execute flawlessly across every shift. That level of personal care was precisely why Crestview consistently outperformed industry benchmarks year after year. When a guest arrived at a Crestview property, it felt less like checking into a commercial facility and more like returning to a private estate. where every preference was honored before they even voiced it. But Gerald Thorne, who had been appointed CEO 8 months prior after an aggressive private equity buyout following the founder's sudden retirement, saw luxury hospitality strictly through a narrow spreadsheet of immediate margin extractions and short-term cost reductions. The previous afternoon, Gerald had summoned me to an emergency budget review by sending a blunt single-line email demanding an immediate 70% reduction in my department's operating capital. I spent the entire night assembling a comprehensive defense. I compiled extensive evidence demonstrating that our guest return rate was nearly double the national average, that our net promoter scores had hit record highs for 3 consecutive years, and that 54% of our lucrative corporate retreat bookings were directly tied to our white glove service standards. I entered that boardroom prepared to negotiate, to present detailed financial metrics, and to explain that gutting 70% of our operational budget would permanently destroy the brand identity that justified our premium room rates. Gerald refused to glance at a single page of my report. Instead, he announced to the assembled board that he had already signed the executive decree to slash my department. The meeting was not a strategic discussion. It was a public execution, and it's intended to assert absolute dominance over the senior leadership. When I confronted him on why he had scheduled the meeting if the decision was already finalized, Gerald delivered his arrogant ultimatum, confident that a 48-year-old executive would capitulate out of financial fear. To solidify the public humiliation, he had intentionally invited the executive board to witness my surrender. What Gerald failed to realize was that he was also attempting to force me to sign a predatory separation release that would surrender my proprietary guest profiling system. The document contained vague clauses attempting to bypass federal notice requirements under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, specifically Title 29 of the United States Code Section 2101. Which mandates advance written notice for major corporate restructurings affecting large operational teams. Furthermore, his legal team had attached an altered document containing what appeared to be an invalid pre-signed signature page, teetering dangerously close to document forgery. My labor attorney had warned me that signing such an agreement would strip my rights and allow Crestview to claim my private software algorithms without compensation. Before I detail how his arrogance unraveled everything he fought to control, I want to pause and thank you for listening to my story today. In a world full of endless digital noise, taking the time to hear how corporate hubris meets its eventual reckoning means a great deal to me. Please take a moment to share in the comments where you are listening from today. I always enjoy reading your responses and connecting with listeners across the country. Now let us return to what unfolded next. I did not raise my voice, nor did I slam doors or express visible anger. I simply walked back to my corner office on the 9th floor, packed my framed family photographs and personal notebooks into my leather bag, and logged out of the company network for the final time. It was 2 o'clock on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. I refrained from sending a dramatic farewell email to my staff of 40 operations managers. I knew that any emotional outburst would only give Gerald's legal team leverage. I walked past security, stepped into the elevator, and exited the corporate headquarters without looking back once. My team discovered my departure 3 hours later, when routine operational queries went unanswered. Gerald dispatched a junior corporate liaison to inform them that my position had been eliminated under a strategic alignment initiative and that I had elected to pursue external ventures. That was the corporate propaganda. That Harlan Vance had voluntarily stepped down. The initial 7 days of freedom felt completely surreal. After decades of relentless corporate schedule management, my internal biological clock continued to wake me at 5 o'clock every morning. I would instinctively reach for my mobile device to check overnight operational reports from our European and West Coast properties, only to remind myself that Crestview was no longer my responsibility. I spent my mornings walking along quiet coastal trails, breathing fresh sea air, and reflecting on the future of my career at 48 years old. By the second week, my personal phone began buzzing with discreet messages from former submanagers. Operational friction had already surfaced across multiple flagship properties. A regular high-net-worth guest who spent over $40,000 annually at our Miami resort checked in. But the front desk had no record of his wife's severe airborne nut allergy. A catastrophic medical emergency was narrowly avoided only because a senior chef recognized the guest from previous years. At our Chicago property, a corporate titan who had reserved his annual executive retreat was told his customary corner suite was unavailable because a junior manager had double-booked it for a walk-in guest. I chose not to respond to those panicked messages. I bore no ill will toward the frontline staff, but intervening would have validated Gerald Thorne's abusive management practices. Gerald had made his executive calculation. He believed guest satisfaction was an automatic commodity that required no specialized oversight or emotional investment. By the third week, 3 of my top operational directors resigned from Crestview, citing toxic management and impossible workloads. Rather than conducting proper recruitment, Gerald replaced them with inexperienced relatives of board members who lacked basic hospitality training. He handed them control of my former responsibilities and instructed them to cut operating costs even further. By the 4th week, the company entered its peak summer season, a high-stakes period characterized by corporate retreats, lavish weddings, and luxury family vacations. It was during this critical window that Crestview's operational infrastructure began to collapse under the weight of executive incompetence. A former colleague contacted me to report a catastrophic incident at our flagship oceanfront estate property. A prominent family had booked 15 luxury suites 6 months in advance for a milestone 50th wedding anniversary. I had personally managed their bookings in previous years, meticulously documenting the matriarch's mobility requirements and organizing customized family dining menus. When the 15 family members arrived, the newly hired management team had no record of any special arrangements. The suite assignments were scattered across 3 different buildings, and the requested dining accommodations were completely ignored. The matriarch, deeply offended by the chaotic reception and indifference of the front desk supervisor, gathered her family, canceled all 15 reservations on the spot, and checked into a competing luxury hotel down the drive. As she departed the lobby, she informed the front desk supervisor that Crestview had completely lost its soul. That single cancellation represented over $65,000 in direct lodging revenue, not including dining, spa, and event expenditures. A second major catastrophe occurred at our Denver Mountain Resort just days later. A prestigious national law firm had reserved 35 executive rooms for their annual partner summit. I had spent 2 years building a personal relationship with the firm's senior managing partner, ensuring that private meeting rooms were equipped with high-speed encrypted networks and specific catering schedules. Under Gerald's cost-cutting directives, the local management eliminated dedicated IT support and reduced food service staffing by half. The meeting rooms were unheated upon arrival. Internet connections failed repeatedly during crucial client presentations, and meal service was delayed by over 2 hours. The managing partner called the front desk in fury, demanding to speak with me, only to be informed that I had been terminated months ago. The firm immediately canceled their multi-year corporate contract with Crestview, representing an annual revenue loss exceeding $200,000. A third incident unfolded at our Seattle downtown property, where a high-tech venture capital group had booked a block of 20 suites for an international investor conference. The newly appointed general manager, hired by Gerald to enforce spending reductions, refused to honor complimentary executive lounge access that had been guaranteed in writing under my previous leadership. The lead investor was so outraged by the petty nickel and diming that he moved the entire delegation to a rival luxury hotel mid-stay, posting a searing review online that garnered thousands of views within 48 hours. Similar operational disasters multiplied across the portfolio. Long-standing patrons who had frequented Crestview for over a decade discovered that their loyalty was met with bureaucratic apathy. Standard amenities were downgraded, staff responsiveness plummeted, and personalized care disappeared entirely. In a desperate attempt to patch the growing operational void, Gerald Thorne hired 3 external consultancy firms in rapid succession. The first consultant lasted 3 weeks before resigning in frustration over Gerald's micromanagement. The second lasted 5 weeks, while the third quit after just 14 days. None of them could replicate what I had built, because genuine hospitality cannot be codified into rigid, cold corporate checklists. It stems from an organizational culture that respects both employees and guests, a culture Gerald had actively destroyed. By the third month following my departure, Crestview's quarterly guest retention rate had plummeted by 38%. The financial loss was compounded by a wave of damning online reviews from influential luxury travel bloggers. The narrative across industry publications was consistent. Crestview Resorts had sacrificed its premium identity for short-sighted margin extraction. Furthermore, Gerald's legal team attempted to seize control of my private client notes, alleging that my personal notebooks belonged to the corporation. I retained prominent legal counsel who immediately issued a formal cease and desist letter. We reminded Gerald Thorne that under Title 17 of the United States Code Section 106, the Copyright Act, my personal, non-proprietary methodology notes, and independent research developed outside corporate systems remain my exclusive intellectual property. Any attempt by Crestview to confiscate or duplicate my private work would result in immediate federal litigation for copyright infringement. Faced with potential legal exposure and mounting financial losses, Gerald was forced to back down. But an even larger disaster was quietly taking shape within his own household that would expose his corporate failure on the grandest personal stage imaginable. Gerald Thorne had a 28-year-old daughter named Genevieve. 2 years prior to my departure, I had personally managed Genevieve's engagement celebration at Crestview's premier oceanfront estate. At the time, Genevieve had approached me privately, visibly anxious about organizing an event that would bring together her fiancé's traditional, high society family and her father's corporate associates. I spent over 20 hours working directly with Genevieve to design every element of that weekend. I ensured that her future in-laws' strict dietary preferences were handled with absolute discretion, designed an intimate layout that allowed both families to connect comfortably, and arranged for custom white gardenia arrangements, a tender tribute to Genevieve's late grandmother, who had passed away earlier that year. The engagement party was an undeniable triumph. Genevieve had hugged me with tears in her eyes, thanking me for turning what could have been a nerve-wracking ordeal into the most magical evening of her life. When Genevieve finalized her wedding plans, she insisted on booking the same luxury oceanfront estate at Crestview for a full 3-day weekend event involving 70 high-profile guests. The booking had been secured 14 months in advance, while I was still directing operations. Genevieve had assumed that the same flawless standards and personal care would govern her wedding weekend. She had no idea that her father had driven me out of the company, eliminated my entire department, and replaced experienced professionals with unqualified sycophants. When Genevieve and her wedding party arrived on Friday afternoon, the operational breakdown commenced almost immediately. First, despite Genevieve having submitted explicit written requests for early suite access so the bridal party could prepare for evening portraits, the front desk informed her that none of the 70 rooms were ready. The bride, her elderly relatives, and her future in-laws were forced to wait in a crowded, noisy lobby for nearly an hour, while harried housekeepers scrambled to finish basic turnover. When Genevieve finally entered the bridal suite, she was met with generic, standard floral arrangements. The customized white gardenias she had specifically requested in memory of her grandmother were nowhere to be seen. When her mother questioned the floor manager, the staff member offered a blank stare, admitting he had no record of any floral specifications. That evening's rehearsal dinner proved even more disastrous. The kitchen staff, operating under severe budget cuts and stripped of specialized catering supervisors, served dishes containing ingredients that violated the strict religious and dietary restrictions of the groom's family. When the groom quietly brought the mistake to the banquet manager's attention, the manager reacted defensively, offering curt excuses rather than immediate rectification. The groom's parents spent the evening sitting awkwardly at the main table without eating, deeply offended by the apparent disrespect. Genevieve maintained a brave face throughout Friday evening, attempting to smooth over the tension, but the operational decay only intensified on Saturday morning. The bridal party had scheduled pre-wedding spa treatments. When they arrived at the wellness facility, they discovered that the newly appointed spa director had failed to reserve the private suites or order the specialized organic skin products Genevieve had selected months in advance. An argument erupted in the spa lobby between an upset bridesmaid and the defensive manager. Genevieve was forced to spend the morning of her wedding calming down frantic guests and resolving operational blunders that should have been managed seamlessly behind the scenes. While the outdoor marriage ceremony proceeded smoothly due to an independent wedding planner Genevieve had brought in, the evening reception at Crestview's Grand Ballroom unraveled completely. The resort's audiovisual staff failed to load the bride's curated song list, a collection of meaningful tracks recording the couple's decade-long relationship. Instead, the resort played generic, uninspired lounge music. When the groom requested specific songs, the technician curtly announced that the custom audio files were missing from the system. To make matters worse, the banquet service fell into total disarray. Courses were served at irregular, chaotic intervals. Hot entrees arrived cold, and dessert was distributed before half the tables had completed their main course. By midnight, what was supposed to be a magnificent celebration of love had transformed into an exhausting marathon of corporate mismanagement. On Sunday morning, during the farewell brunch, Genevieve's mother confronted Gerald Thorne in front of several executive board members. Multiple staff members who witnessed the exchange confirmed that Genevieve's mother looked Gerald dead in the eye and said, "Your arrogance destroyed this company, Gerald. Your own daughter spent her wedding night crying in her suite because your resort failed her at every single turn. Her new family believes we intentionally humiliated them." She added bitterly that his relentless drive to cut costs had alienated the very people who mattered most. The fallout from the wedding disaster was swift and devastating. On Sunday afternoon, while Genevieve and her husband departed for their honeymoon in visible disappointment, my personal phone lit up with incoming calls. The caller identity displayed Gerald Thorne's name. I let it ring through to voicemail. Over the next 7 days, Gerald placed 17 calls to my private line and left a succession of increasingly frantic voice messages. His initial messages attempted to maintain a professional veneer, suggesting that Crestview was reviewing executive compensation models and would be open to discussing a lucrative consulting retainer. By the 10th voicemail, his demeanor had completely dissolved. His tone was frantic, admitting that severe operational failures had occurred during a high-profile corporate event and acknowledging that my operational leadership was indispensable. Simultaneously, I received messages from 3 board members who had laughed at me during the fateful meeting, including Melanie, begging me to return calls and assist in stabilizing the company. Behind closed corporate doors, the executive board was in complete turmoil. The private equity firm that held controlling debt instruments issued a stern warning regarding breach of fiduciary duty and corporate asset dissipation. Several board members who had enthusiastically backed Gerald's cost-slashing plan quickly realized that their own stock options were evaporating into thin air. In a panic, they voted to demand that Gerald secure my return at any financial cost, threatening to initiate formal removal proceedings if he failed to stabilize operational performance within 30 days. I blocked every single number. I had no intention of serving as a temporary band-aid for a sinking ship led by a toxic executive. 2 weeks after the wedding, Gerald Thorne took the desperate step of driving to my private residence. I was returning home from an afternoon round of golf when I spotted his luxury sedan parked along my driveway. Gerald stepped out of the vehicle. He appeared visibly transformed. His posture was stooped, dark circles underlined his eyes, and his tailored suit looked ill-fitting and rumpled. "Harlan, please, I need 10 minutes of your time," Gerald pleaded, stepping toward me with outstretched hands. I halted near my porch, keeping my distance. You have no business being on my property, Gerald. State your purpose quickly. Genevieve refuses to speak to me, Gerald confessed, his voice breaking as tears welled in his eyes. She will not answer my calls. She refused my wedding gift, and my son-in-law's family has cut off all personal and business ties with me. She blames me for ruining the most important weekend of her life, and the board is threatening to remove me for breach of fiduciary duty and corporate asset dissipation. The quarterly numbers are a total catastrophe. The board members who laughed with me are now demanding my resignation. I need you to come back, Harlan. Name your price. I looked at the weeping CEO, the same man who, just months earlier, had sat back in his executive chair and invited 7 subordinates to mock my life's work. This was never about money. Gerald, I replied calmly, you believe that hospitality was merely an equation of cutting costs and exerting power over people. You treated your employees as disposable, you treated your guests as financial targets, and you treated me as an adversary. You destroyed a 4-year legacy of excellence in less than 4 months. I was wrong. I admit it, Gerald cried out on the sidewalk. I will pay you triple your former salary. I will grant you full operational autonomy and a seated position on the board of directors. Just come back and save Crestview. I shook my head slowly. Some things, once broken, cannot be restored by throwing money at them. You made your executive choices, Gerald. Now you must live with the legal and financial consequences. I turned my back on him, walked inside my home, and locked the door, leaving the broken CEO sobbing alone on the driveway. In the months that followed Gerald's desperate plea, the collapse of Crestview Hospitality Group accelerated rapidly. Wealthy social circles across the country learned of the disaster at Genevieve's wedding. High net worth families and corporate accounts systematically canceled their event bookings, resulting in the loss of 8 major corporate retreat contracts within 60 days. Financial analysts published damning reports highlighting Crestview's mounting liabilities, severe operational decay, and potential legal exposure under Title 29 of the United States Code Section 2101 due to improper employee terminations. Crestview's stock value plummeted by over 60%, driving the company to the brink of insolvency. Desperate to avoid complete personal financial ruin, Gerald Thorne was forced to surrender his controlling interest in Crestview, selling his shares at a fraction of their peak valuation. He was ousted from the board of directors in shame, his executive reputation permanently tarnished. Meanwhile, my own journey took a remarkably prosperous turn. Recognizing the immense market demand for authentic luxury guest experience management, I partnered with an esteemed hospitality investor named Raymond Miller. Together, we launched Vance & Miller Hospitality Advisory Group. Within 6 months, our firm was retained by 3 of Crestview's primary competitors to overhaul their service operations from the ground up. I instituted my proven operational frameworks, trained hundreds of passionate hospitality workers, and implemented guest-centric retention strategies. Our client hotels experienced a 45% increase in guest satisfaction scores within 90 days of implementation. Former regular patrons who had abandoned Crestview quickly migrated to the properties managed by our advisory group. They immediately recognized the familiar warmth, meticulous attention to detail, and genuine care that had once defined Crestview. One prominent corporate client remarked to me during a resort opening, "We spent months searching for the level of service Crestview used to provide. We finally found it again, Harlan, because you were the true heart of that operation all along." One evening, while attending a national hospitality gala in Chicago, I happened to cross paths with Melanie, the former human resources vice president who had laughed so bitterly during my termination meeting. She was standing near the lobby bar, looking worn and subdued. When she recognized me, she froze, visibly embarrassed. I walked over to her table with a calm, polite composure. "Hello, Melanie." She lowered her head, looking down at her glass before speaking softly. "Harlan, I want to apologize for my behavior in that boardroom. It was disgraceful. I laughed because Gerald was the CEO, because everyone else was doing it, and because I was terrified of becoming his next target if I showed any sympathy." I listened quietly before responding. "Fear is a poor excuse for cruelty, Melanie, but I bear no hatred toward you." She offered a sad, repentant smile. I resigned from Crestview 3 months ago. The company became a ghost town. Everything you built vanished overnight. You were right to walk away. Today, at 48 years old, I am a managing partner in a thriving hospitality consulting firm with equity ownership in 3 premier boutique resort properties. Our firm continues to expand nationally, proving that ethical management and genuine human care yield far greater dividends than toxic corporate greed. I am surrounded by executive partners who respect human dignity, value operational excellence, and understand that sustainable business success is built on trust, integrity, and genuine human connection. Gerald Thorne set out to humiliate me and force me onto my knees. In doing so, he only exposed his own profound weakness and destroyed everything he sought to control. I never returned to Crestview, not out of malice or pride, but because true strength lies in knowing your worth, honoring your integrity, and stepping forward into a brighter, self-determined future. Thank you for staying with me to the end of my story. If my journey resonated with you, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel for more powerful stories, and leaving your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means everything.